Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young boys in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele. Welcome, everyone, to our first real episode, I guess, of the Bottom Up podcast. And I'm really excited for this one. And today we're going to be talking about mentoring and mentorship. Is there a generational divide? But before we go into talking about the meat of the episode, I wanted to introduce everyone to my co-host, guest co-host, I guess. We'll see how often she's going to be coming on. We'll probably get her on as much as we possibly can. Attorney Kristen Hardy, classmate of mine and all-around superstar. But I'll have Kristen introduce herself and make herself familiar with the audience.
Thank you so much, Emil. I'm really excited to be here. As Emil mentioned, I will be guest hosting from time to time as much as I can get up here to do it. But this is super exciting because, as Emil mentioned, we are classmates. We graduated together at Marquette back in 2014. Oh, my gosh. Right now, I am an attorney at a Fortune 90 based headquartered in Milwaukee. I've worked in-house my entire career, which is...
Big shot.
Is that a big shot? It's just different.
You've not been in the ghetto. That's what that means. You've been in the burbs.
I've had a nice career so far. Some really good organizations based in Milwaukee. I've been here for about 11 years total, which sounds crazy when I say it. I'm originally from Detroit, but I've made Milwaukee my home. Live in Milwaukee, work in Milwaukee, and it's been awesome. So very excited to be here.
Awesome. And in addition to your practice, you're very engaged within the legal community in the Milwaukee community at large. You've served on several boards. I believe you're currently the chair of the Board of Governors.
I am the chair of the Board of Governors, yes. So I just finished up my tenure as the secretary for the State Bar of Wisconsin. Emil and I were both board members for the YLD, which you just finished up your presidency. I am on the board for the Milwaukee Bar Association. I'm a past president of the Wisconsin Association of African American Lawyers. I do some other really fun, interesting things as well. I'm the acting board president of the Bronzeville Center for the Arts. It's a new museum and cultural center that we're opening up in the heart of Milwaukee, the Bronzeville area. So more to come on that. And then I'm a board member for Lotus Legal Clinic, in addition to a million other things that we don't really care about.
You're just all around fancy. I get it.
I guess.
I get it. Well, hey, thanks for joining in. We do have a guest today, someone who I'm also excited to have here, who's going to be talking with us and helping us really explore this topic and give some perspectives and insights into mentorship, mentoring, and if there is a generational divide. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest of this episode, attorney Syovata Edari. Did I get that right? Syovata. She goes by Vata, though.
Yes.
The T pronounced. You gotta enunciate the T.
Right.
If I say Vata, that's not gonna do it.
It's Vata.
It's Vata.
Yes. There we go.
Just a little brief intro, and Vata, I'm going to have you talk about yourself. But Vata is an attorney who turned into a chocolatier, Academy of Chocolate award-winning chocolatier. Not just once, not just twice, but
30 times.
30 times, right?
Can I just say, I had some of the and I emailed you. I don't know if you remember, Vata.
I feel like I do.
I emailed you. They gave it away at a gift at my job during the Christmas time, and I'd never had the chocolate before. And I love sweets, but I'm not a big chocolate person. I ate the whole box. Then I bought it for my whole family, my mom, my dad, everyone for Christmas got, the big box of chocolate for me. So you're amazing at what you do. The chocolate's amazing.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we're gonna have a little bit of a discussion on how you made that leap. So that's very fascinating, and it's always been fascinating to lots of people. But Vata, you still practice law as well from time to time.
Very occasionally. For instance, right now, I drafted the petition that was filed here in Dane County, the Dane County Circuit Court, on behalf of Sharon Irwin Henry, who's the grandmother of Tony Robinson, who was shot and killed by police officer Matt Kenny back in 2015, and he was never charged, which is the pattern here. And so there's a little known statute under Wisconsin law. It's 96802 sub 3 that allows anybody, any private person to file a petition, to petition a court, a circuit court, and ask that, facts and evidence be reviewed for a determination of probable cause to determine then whether the court will use its discretion to allow the filing of a criminal complaint. And so I'm actually, it's been done once before that I know of in a police homicide case by Attorney Deja Vishny and Kim Motley in Milwaukee. We're taking a slightly different approach, and I've got a kind of a team of, there's 7 of us all together that are doing it for the most part pro bono. But I was very much involved in that case when it happened. Actually, ironically, the night of that homicide was kind of my chocolate debut in Madison. My good friend and childhood friend, Kaleem Care, who is the founder of One City Childhood Center that's now evolved into a high school, commissioned me to do a fundraiser box with his logo on the chocolate. So I went to the fundraiser and I was selling this chocolate, and I was feeling like, really special, like, oh, I'm a chocolatier now, And I'm driving back home to the east side from the west side, which is where the event was, and I get calls from my daughter and her friends who were going to East High School at the time, telling me that something happened, that there was a shooting, there was an officer involved, and that 2 of their classmates were arrested and they needed help. So I got involved very, very early on in the case, and I've stayed in touch with the family, stayed connected with them. So I got involved. So I still maintain my license to practice.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how did you get into the law in the first place?
Oh man, that's there. I grew up in a really back then what would be considered politically radical family, and but I can tell you, the first time I ever thought about being an attorney was my brother got into some trouble when he was 16, I was 15, and my parents couldn't afford an attorney at the time, and he was appointed a public defender named Peter Rubin. And Peter Rubin successfully kept my brother from being waived into adult court, where he would have been in prison. And instead, he did a little bit of time at Ethan Allen School for Boys. And at the time, I was like, wow, we didn't have to pay this lawyer, and he just helped. So that made a big impression on me at a young age, that somebody would fight for you, and we're not paying them. I mean, he was getting paid a salary, but public defenders don't make much. And because I grew up kind of in social justice movements, and I didn't think the system had things built in that actually could help people like that, and that if they did, that they would actually be helpful. So Peter Rubin, I think, is very well known. I think lawyers my age and older, everybody knows probably who he was, especially here in Madison. But that had a huge impact on me. And then just my parents always got me really involved in activism in the community in Milwaukee where I grew up, and so. In 1981, I think it was around 1981, there was the police chief of Milwaukee was named Police Chief Breyer, and he was the chief under Mayor Meyer, and there was a very awful regime. Police homicides and abuse were rampant, and a young man named Ernest Lacey was killed. He was falsely accused of raping a white woman and arrested, and I think he asphyxiated in the back of a paddy wagon and he died. And there was a huge protest that erupted around that case. And my parents, I was about 9 at the time, my parents brought me to every protest. That's just how they were. So I grew up being very, very aware of social inequities and injustice. And so I think at the time I decided to go to law school, now kind of skipping ahead, I did my undergrad here in Madison. And after undergrad, I was working for the Fair Housing Council here. And I was a complaint analyst. So I was taking housing discrimination complaints. And there was a panel of cooperating lawyers. And so we'd package them all up. We had a very small staff. It was myself and then an investigator and then our director. And I thought, man, I'm making $7 an hour with no benefits. And I could do what these lawyers can do. So I literally woke up one day and I said to my mom, Mom, I'm going to law school. She kind of laughed because, I used to be kind of a pothead. I smoked, I was kind of like a hippie kind of. And so, like, yeah, whatever. And I was in law school like that fall, and then when I went to law school, it kind of was like, I knew I'd either be like a plaintiff side civil rights attorney or a defense attorney. And I really wanted to be a public defender. That's what ended up happening. I clerked outside of law school. And then my first job as a lawyer was in the appellate division in Milwaukee in the public defender's office. Then I moved into the trial division. And then I saw another side of it that really frustrated me that still exists today. I mean, public defenders are overworked and underpaid. And honestly, they are some of the best lawyers you will ever see. And it's sad that they have such a poor reputation. There's
not being given the assistance that they
Right. And, I never made my caseload. There's a quota system, at least in Milwaukee. That I don't know how it is here in Madison, but I was always under my not meeting my caseload requirements because I was fighting my cases and winning, and so it frustrated me. That the whole situation just frustrated me, so I got out and I tried a stint in private practice, but I'm not good at asking people without money for money. So I then went to the federal defender system in Kansas first, and then went to Eastern Washington before coming back here to Madison. And there's a whole lot of other story mixed in there of how that all happened, but I know you only have like 45 minutes for this podcast. That's like 2 more podcasts.
Hey, so it sounds like you've really had a very full experience, at least within the law, from having this impetus and this beautiful story of how you started on, being, raised in a very social justice conscious family, seeing this early depiction of an attorney assisting your brother get out of, avoid the adult system as a juvenile, and then you get in and you really follow your passions, and you do things at the state level and also at the federal level. Now, when did you make that pivot into becoming a chocolatier, as you said? I don't know, my French is quite accurate.
Well, so I'm also a single mother, and I've got 2 wonderful kids. My daughter is 22. She just graduated from Clark College in it's Clark University. She gets mad when I mix this up. It's the one in Worcester, Massachusetts. Good school, and she's now living in New York. And my son Solomon is 14; he'll be 15 in a couple weeks. And I've been a single mom, like a totally single mom, not like even like the dads get my kids 1 week on, 1 week off. They are all with me all the time, and especially early childhood, didn't have much of a relationship with their fathers, so everything was always on me. And as you know, and especially my generation and older, there was no room, there was no telework, there was no space for you to parent your children in our industry, in the legal industry. And it presented such a challenge. I mean, I found it difficult to keep jobs. And I'm also, I'm a Black woman lawyer, so we are held I don't think it's a secret that we're held to a completely different standard. I would see white lawyers being forwarded leave time, right, who had stay-at-home wives, right, to tend to their kids when they're teenage kids. When I have like a 2-year-old son, right, this is in Kansas I'm talking about. This is a real story, where I had to search on Craigslist because even though I didn't have a caseload because I was new, my boss refused to, even though she had the discretion to, she refused to forward leave time to me when my son got an ear infection. So I had to keep my job after relocating my whole life and my kids to Wichita, Kansas, right? It was things like that just wore on me. And I ultimately actually got fired from that job for insubordination. I fought for 3 years. Again, that's a whole nother podcast because one of the things I found out in that process is the federal judiciary. So I was a federal judicial employee. Our federal judiciary has exempted itself from the Civil Rights Act. Most people don't know that. Anyway, so I got burned out from, because, I was handling very high stakes cases. I was representing people running drugs for the drug cartels, child pornography cases, complex drug cases, very complex fraud cases with really, really high stakes. And not being allowed space to actually parent my kids at all, and then dealing with the oppression of abusive bosses, and abusive work environments. It really burned me out by the age of like 45. I was like, why am I even doing this? And I put everything into my cases. I was just telling, I volunteer at a transitional housing program here, and I was telling the guys in the program that, I was always the kind of lawyer, like to this day, my cell phone number has never changed since I got a cell phone like 25 years ago or however long. I've had the same cell phone number. Every single one of my clients had my cell phone number. Their mamas, their brothers, their sisters, their cousins. I never walled myself off from my clients. And I think that made me very effective at being able to tell. This is all we are, storytellers, really, at the end of the day. And so, but it also like kind of can sap you when you're also dealing with a whole bunch of other, especially unnecessary stuff, right? And so I think I discovered the chocolate arts. I've always had like a food thing. I had an ice cream phase at one point. I had a cake phase. It's always been something sweet. And I've always loved chocolate. And so I actually started making my chocolate bonbons when I moved back here from the federal system and tried to launch my practice here in Madison. But I started making chocolate to gift to lawyers to generate referrals. And then a couple of law firms early on placed some nice orders, like $2,000. It was like a nice little, side hustle income. And I was like, I really like this. And the more I got into it, I'm like, wow, this is just beautiful. And then next thing you know, I'm traveling to France to train at Valrhona. Then I'm traveling to Italy to train at ECAM. Then I'm training with Luis Amato, who's one of the world's best. I've taken a lot of online training with Melissa Koppel. I mean, I've trained with some of the world's best. And I just, like that relief of getting lost in something that's a precise science, right? Where if something goes wrong, you can figure out what went wrong and fix it, as opposed to when you go to court and my client gets like 20 years and I'm like, this makes no sense. The judge maybe didn't have breakfast that day and he's diabetic or something. I mean, all of the irrational things that happen within the legal system weren't there. And it's something I kind of had control and command over, and I could really master that. And so I think it just gave me this almost an endorphin release to be in there. And chocolate actually there's science behind it. It is a mood elevator, so I just kind of got lost in that world, and I thought, why am I still grinding like this, And so I kind of saw a way, I don't want to say a way out, but I don't know about you, but I don't know that I know one happy lawyer, really. It's a very oppressive industry. It is. And, if there's one bit of advice I have to give to younger lawyers, it's find a hobby, find something completely, not drinking, not doing drugs, not destroying yourself, but find something you can get lost in, right? That takes your mind away from everything, whatever that thing is.
You just said a couple of things that really resonated with me. One, the science aspect of making chocolate. When I was in law school, during finals, I would bake all kinds of interesting cupcakes or cakes, because baking, more than even cooking, I love to cook, but cooking, you kind of get a taste and adjust. And baking is really a science. If you mess up, it's the wrong amount of flour, if you don't sift it, if it's the wrong kind of butter, you can ruin whatever the dish is. And I tried to use the salted butter, and you really need to use butter with no salt. Right. So that really resonates with me. And that was my hobby in law school. It's a hobby I had to give up because I like to eat the sweets too.
Well, look at what people were doing during the pandemic. I remember trying to bake some bread, or during the height of the pandemic. We're still in a pandemic.
Are you sure?
That's a whole nother podcast now. I remember trying to find yeast at the grocery store.
Yes.
I could not find yeast. I'm like, where's the yeast? Is there a supply chain breakdown? No, people are baking bread like never before. So there is something to that.
It's relaxing, and the science, and coming from a career or school, whatever, where it's there's not always a clear answer. It just felt nice to control something.
Right.
And I really would say I get to control this. And even if it's 3 a.m, I'm getting back home, whatever it is, I would bake. And it really did something for me. But something else you said was, being in this profession as a Black woman. So I do, just kind of to segue into the topic, as a Black woman, as a Black woman, how do you feel like, or do you feel like you've been mentored in this profession? I'll say both of your professions, actually. We'll start with the law, obviously.
So I walk into spaces, despite how disruptive my very presence might be. And my dad, I really credit my dad for giving me that gumption or the chutzpah, whatever you want to call it, to the audacity, right? Which is really what you need. This is a very white male dominated industry. And you have to put yourself, you have to get out of your comfort zone and just be in these space. I mean, when you go into a courtroom, you have to do that, So you have to really find ways to kind of block out the noise, and the voices that aren't even maybe coming from that room, but that you've just heard through your whole life. And so I always just put myself in places and stayed until I was pushed out. And I think that's important, and it also just doing that, asserting yourself and standing your ground, it gives you a sense of confidence and just it's really kind of a beautiful thing. So often we just want to, I think, shrink ourselves,
Sure.
And fawn, right, for acceptance. And it's the worst thing to do. Yeah. Because honestly, as much as we are entitled as anybody else to be in this space, they need us in this space. We have value. It's not like we're just nothing. We have incredible value. Just our presence can change the chemistry of something. I'll tell you, towards the end of my full-time practice, I got more and more calls from white clients, particularly millennial white boys who are like, I don't want another white man lawyer. So people are looking for new perspectives, and that's what we bring into this industry. That I think and it's not something you can teach. It's not something. It's a swagger we have that nobody has, and it has a huge value. So
let me just sort of set the stage a little bit. So you are going to be talking about mentorship and mentoring and sponsorship. And Kristen, this is an area I know that you've done a lot of work for in terms of your advocacy work within the community, within the legal profession. So it's only proper that we get at least some common definitions for these terms as we're going to be using them today.
Yeah, sure. So I think we all have a general understanding of what mentorship is. When I look at a good mentor, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that is even in your industry. It's nice if they are in your industry, but it's really someone that you can ask the hard questions to that's not your boss or maybe not in the same space as you. You could ask them hard questions. They can give you good advice. And they're really like your sounding board. When I think about a sponsor, there's this great book by Carla Harris where she gives a definition, so I'm going to borrow it from her. A sponsor is someone who will use their internal political and social capital to move your career forward in an organization. So often sponsors work with us. In the perfect world, your supervisor is your sponsor, is your best sponsor. But often in the legal profession, I'm in-house, so I'm going to keep referencing in-house terms. It could be the general counsel who gives you an opportunity. It could be a vice president, maybe not even in legal, somewhere who says, hey, I think Emil's talented. Give him the chance to run this segment of the business. So it's someone who really, you have to have the social capital. You have to have clout. You have to be respected so that you are able to pass on those opportunities. Now, in both of these definitions, there has to be an authentic connection. The difference between, I believe, in my opinion, mentorship and sponsorship is mentorship, this becomes your friend. This is a person you talk to. They really know you. Sponsorship, they don't even have to really know you to be a good sponsor. It's more of a, hey, I was around Emil a couple of times, and he seemed smart. He had good questions. He asked good questions. He had good answers. Maybe we should give them this opportunity. They don't even have to know you that well. And I think I've benefited greatly in my career from excellent sponsors who I've worked with them on a project or two, and they pulled me to the side and said, hey, I think you could be a shining star. Let's do X, Y, Z. Let's meet. And then let's see if we can get an opportunity going for you. So both of them are very important in our career for young lawyers. They're very important for minorities. And we kind of flounder if we don't have those things in our organizations.
So I gotta admit, the first time I heard of the term sponsorship was actually hearing you speak.
Oh, really?
I'd experienced it without knowing what to call it, and so and it really resonated with me in terms of that's what that's called, and that's what we need more of. Now, the American Bar Association describes mentorship in the legal profession as a one-on-one relationship between an experienced lawyer and another lawyer or law student or potential law student. And that's sort of the definition that's given. So obviously the premise and the question we present is, when it comes to mentorship and mentoring and sponsorship, is there a generational divide? Now, I'm going to turn to you first, Vada, from giving us some top-down sort of, perspective as someone who's a little further along in her career. And then I'm also going to turn to Kristen just to get her thoughts on that. As someone who's a little newer, we're going into our ninth year.
No, are we new?
I really want to stay young. I want to be a young lawyer forever. It bothers me now that in the next year we'll be practicing for about a decade. That's crazy. I know, right? And I still feel like I don't know as much as I need to know. But is there a generational divide, Vada?
I think there definitely is. This is the first time I've heard the word sponsorship used in this type of a context. And I can say for myself, I don't think I've ever been sponsored. I've been induced or brought into places as a token. Mm-hmm. And that's not good.
Right.
So I have a whole lot to say about that. But mentorship is, you have to have mentors. And if they're not seeking you out, you have to seek mentors out. And honestly, I don't I'm now an attorney of 20 years, right? I still, things are always changing, right? Like even Emil, there may be some circumstances where, you teach me something, right? So part of it is I think getting rid of this hierarchical approach and these kind of power differentials, because we're all colleagues at the end of the day. And I think when older lawyers stop growing, that's why they call it practice, right? It's practice. Mm-hmm. It's constant. You're constantly learning, law, right? So, it's there's an acknowledgement built into our industry that we are always growing. There's always new things coming out. The laws are always changing. Interpretations are always changing, which is a good thing. But I'll tell you what I did as a young lawyer.
Before we go on to personal stories, I just want to drill down further on that. So you said, yes, there is a generational divide when it comes to thoughts or attitudes related to mentorship. What do you see as that generational divide?
Okay, sorry, I forgot the actual question. So, my son Solomon is Gen Z, and he's always calling me on stuff, right, and accusing me of our generation of destroying the earth and the planet and all that stuff. Although he's benefiting tremendously from it, and I love having kids because they challenge me and I let them do that. But I also check them and tell them, look, with age does come experience with age, and that has to be respected. You cannot replace that. You can't just grow that, So I think, with technological advancements, the information available to you two is very different than what was available to me at your age and your levels of practice, right? And so some of it makes sense in the context of just evolution and technology and generations and, growth. And it's great, right? You should be better than I was. Mm-hmm. And so, and have more and have things just a little bit more, things should make more sense, right? But I think sometimes, if those of you all that are ahead of where we were, and maybe even ahead in many ways of where I am right now, because of what's at your disposal right now, there can be some arrogance that comes with that, where you lose sight of the value of the eldership, right? And the value of wisdom that can only come with age and experience. So I love stories. And again, that's what I think we all are as lawyers. We're storytellers and historians. And I love history. I love stories. So for me, I was always that lawyer that was trying to seek out older lawyers. Or I would go and sit in a courtroom. Rodney Cuby, who is, I think I credit is my real main, most impactful mentor in my legal career. I used to call him up and I'd be like, Attorney Cuby, when is your next trial? So I could go sit and watch his trial. And I was single parenting, had a huge caseload. I still made the time to just go sit and watch him in trial. or if I heard about even lawyers that didn't have, weren't known, right? Lawyers in the public defender's office. Some of the best lawyers in the state are in the public defender's office, and nobody knows who they are, and I'd watch them in trial. And so just watching and observing and listening. And I think a lot of times, I don't want to cast aspersions on you all, some millennials and stuff, but sometimes I wonder, have you lost sight of that, value of that, just observing and listening, and also valuing that wisdom, like I said, that can only come from years.
Oh, okay. Battle words have been, the gauntlet has been laid down. So, Chris, I'm going to turn to you.
Okay.
Is there a generational divide? And if so, what is that generational divide as you see it?
Well, I actually really like how Vata put it. She likes that her children challenge her, but you have to check them. And I think
I'm still mama.
I agree with that in a lot of ways. I'm kind of old school in many, many ways, despite being a millennial. So I do value my mother.
To me, man. You told me you're going to come here. And
I'm sorry, Emil. I'm sorry. Emil and I have always been on the opposite end of everything, pretty much as long as we've known each other. So this is no shocker, which is why this is going to be so great. But my mom always says, something to the effect of, keep living. If I say something and, oh, well, it's this way. Okay, well, keep living, because your perspective might change on that, or you may come to my side and understand. If you just keep living, you'll see what I mean, what I'm trying to say. And we grow up. I grew up with great deference, for my elders. But the thing that I will potentially may agree here is sometimes, especially in the legal profession, it feels like too much deference, or we're expected to have too much deference, which means I lose myself or my thoughts within someone else who's potentially trying to mentor me or help me. I think we both have to, on both ends of the generations, have to understand that we add value, that there are things that we all can learn from one another, and be respectful in that way. So that's my one issue isn't the right word, but it's an observation that I have in this profession, where we're expected to have great deference when someone who's been practicing, we often hear, I've been practicing as long as you've been alive.
A presumption, too.
Yes.
Well, the other
deference
thing.
Deference before even earned. And there is, which coming from an African culture, a Nigerian, I understand that concept, right? And I think, to just piggyback off of Kristen's point, and even when that presumption doesn't hold true, I'm expected to hold on to those presumptions as well, because you've been a mediocre lawyer for 25 years. Because
I said what I said, right?
Something to that extent. You get. So let me just kind of just tease out the questions, tease out the answers I'm getting here. So, So Kristen, sounds like from your perspective, the generational divide is tied to the idea of this top-down heavy approach, and not us coming to a table and seeing this as a two-way street, because with that comes some level of respect and understanding and empathy.
I want to be clear that we're generalizing here. So
we are. We're generalizing.
Totally generalizing.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, and because this drives to the larger goal, the larger heart of the issue, which is the lack of effect, at least what I think we see as effective mentoring, which we're going to talk about in a second. And Vata, from your experience, at least from your perspective, it sounds like the issue of the generational divide is fermented by mentees or younger lawyers not having the same, drive, or not drive, that's the wrong word, but the same eagerness to seek out mentors.
Or to observe. I'm hearing observe without speaking all the time. Like, it's okay for us to be in the room and watch what's happening without, kind of getting rid of our egos or our own, making sure we're not coming off as arrogant, and really seeking value in attorneys who've truly have been practicing as long as we've been alive, and realizing that there is value there.
I mean, and it's tough for me because I've been out of the practice for a while. Like, Emil, I really appreciate that, the way that you and I met, right? Like, you actually, I think, sought me out originally, right? So, and there's like a small handful of young lawyers, and I personally, I want to be used in that way because I had that. And now it's interesting because in this whole conversation, I think it's important to acknowledge culture.
Yes.
and I'm not a white man lawyer, right? So, boy, this can get real deep and complex. I don't agree with this adherence and deference to this hierarchy, this blind adherence and deference to the hierarchy, right? And I've seen that, and I was excluded when I would seek out, mentorship relationships as a younger lawyer. There were definitely certain places that I was not welcomed. There were little clubs that I was not welcomed. So that's another layer to this of difficulty, especially for us as Black lawyers, right? And it's the same thing in any industry that's very, there's a lot of inequity, even in the chocolate industry that exists. And it can really weigh on you, And so, but that means it's even more important, right, for us to kind of seek each other out.
Right.
And for me, I do believe I have a duty also to seek you out, And I've been thinking a lot about that since we've connected, Emil, about how I have this great value in this history, and I'm buried in my chocolate kitchen all day working in this fact, but I've got a headset that's fully charged. And I would love for young lawyers to call me about, especially people that are want to be trial lawyers, criminal defense trial lawyers. So part of it is us putting ourselves out there, making ourselves available to younger lawyers. I think that it's a dual responsibility. I don't believe in that whole hierarchical thing that you got to go pander to old folks and go to happy hours and.
I just wanted to clarify. So me stating the observation you made isn't necessarily me stating that you agree with it. And I think the observation sound, which is I call it there's an expectation schism, because if you have a generation that understood mentorship as such, right? You basically you reach out, you keep knocking on these doors, even if you're not allowed in. You tolerate the jokes, you tolerate whatever, you get the nuggets and all that stuff, right? When that changes, or when the world changes as it has, that leads to an expectation bias. Because then it's like, oh no. You come to Kristen, my generation would say, okay, no, this has to be a two-way street built on an authentic relationship, and obviously if you've been bred during in that era. It might take an adjustment.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
of some sort.
Right. I mean, I'm dealing with my son because I'm trying to immerse him. I'm trying to get him to be around some positive Black men in his life, and you all's generations and younger, you all aren't putting up with stuff that it's not normal for you. The things that I grew up thinking were normal and which were not. Right. You are now recognizing it and objecting to it and saying no. Which I am so proud to see that. I'm like, God, I love it, right? And so, that creates a lot of barriers. Just what you were saying. What was the phrase that you?
I call it an expectation schism.
Expectation schism. I like that.
I come up with fancy words.
I'm just thinking about the legal profession. To me, is one of the most, and it remains. Maybe it's always been like this. We really hold true and fast to our kind of hazing culture. Mm-hmm. I had to go through it, so you have to go through it, and then that generation has to go through it. It's
awful.
It really is.
And let me tell you, I had a judge in Kansas. So my tenure in Kansas, which was 3 years, I got fired for insubordination. I'm very proud of that. I negotiated a resignation, a voluntary resignation, but I tell everybody the truth. I got fired. But there was a Black judge there, very well known around the country, who was kind of my mentor, but he was also married to our chief investigator. So he had an interest in me not being too disruptive in that system, which I didn't realize at the time. And I remember the stuff I went through there was crazy. I was put in a storage room for an office while the attorneys got suites, the white attorneys got, it was the most Jim Crow, weird, I went to a time machine. And so he was kind of one of my sounding boards. So one day he said, do you know what I had to go through? Do you know what I had to put up with? And because he was trying to get me not to push things too much. And I was like, well, Judge, with all due respect, why should I have to deal with that now? Didn't you make that better for me?
Right.
It's right. And I was just like, wow, that's really kind of messed up. And we ended up parting ways, and that was a decision I made. I decided at that stage, I was like, you know what, his beholdenness to this old, outmoded way of doing things outweighs his value to me as a mentor right now. And sometimes you got to make that decision, and you got to cut your mentor off if they become toxic, because you don't deserve that. You shouldn't. That should never be normal. I think a healthy mentor there's a reciprocal relationship also. Like I said, you may teach me some things, right? Which you already have, in the short time I've known you, Emil. Yeah, I don't encourage anybody to just stick around something that's toxic and bad. Is at that point it no longer has value to you.
I do think it's really, I don't know if easy is the right word, but we can quickly go from, oh, this is how we think it is. We go through all these things in the legal profession, and I won't be like that. And I'll do better when I get to this space. And then next thing you know, we do become beholden to the system. It's not just the legal profession, but that's what we're in it. And I think it holds true and fast more than any other profession that I've seen, which is why it looks the way it still continues to look, because you go through all of these things and you go, well, if I had to do it, well, you have to do it too.
Right, exactly.
So I'm finally in the position to not be hazed anymore. So now I want to haze you. And you're absolutely right. That's not healthy mentorship. It's not healthy sponsorship. And I think some of that's what I love about Gen Z. And that's what I love about kind of reverse mentoring. I try to always mentor law students because they check me too. Yeah. They say, no, well, why do I have to stay at that job for 10 years? Like, I understand but I'm not doing that because I could go somewhere else where it's not toxic for me. Or why do I have to, stay in private practice for this long? I'm going to do what I'm going in-house because I feel like that's better for my mental health or whatever it may be. Right. So they always keep me honest. College students, law students, they keep me honest to go, let me check myself and make sure I'm not becoming a part of the problem, which is so easy to do.
Right.
And I think that's a good place to actually segue into the other aspect of this. So we've talked about the generational divide, what some of those things might be, the expectation schism, and all of that stuff, right? And I think tied to this very issue is the subtle acknowledgement or explicit acknowledgement that even when mentoring does occur, currently it might not be occurring as effectively as folks would probably want it to be. And just to sort of give you guys a sense of this issue, and I talked to some younger lawyers who either just graduated recently or newer in their careers about this fact, right? The absence of effective mentorship and sponsorship, and how the pandemic probably even exacerbated that divide. And I also spoke to some more experienced and older attorneys and some of my mentors. And asking the question, so why do you think that is? And I'm going to tell you some of the reasons I was able to garner and, throw it out, open it up for conversations, right? So you have, at least in private practice and at least within litigation, right, you have clients not wanting to pay for someone to learn on their case, right? You have the issues of Zoom. Generally, I probably put it as, what the pandemic did to work-life balance, expectations, and all that stuff, and work attitudes. And also the fact that, some of these would-be mentors just don't have the time as much, right? And during the conversation I had with a trusted friend of mine, I thought that was very fascinating because I never seen the work-life balance thing placed within this context from the mentor's perspective, right? Now, work-life balance, we're probably gonna do a whole show about that. I have a problem with that phrase. I get the intent, but that's a conversation for a different day. But it was this very unique idea that, well, because of the expectation to juggle these things, right? To go surfing and go working and take care of your kids and all that stuff all in one day. The billable hour requirements have not lessened. So why would I go spend 2 to 3 hours of my time on a daily basis when I could bill my hours and go surfing and take some glorious Instagram pictures to mark the moment? and live out work-life balance. And I got to tell you, I was a little flawed. That was a very unique perspective.
I've thought about that. I mean, even when you asked me to be here, I'm thinking, wow, man, in the time I'm here doing this, I could make 2,000 bonbons, right? But, we have to stop thinking about always having transactional relationships with each other. That is not human. Right. That's not how humanity grows and thrives. And I think, we are in this era, especially, again, as Black professionals, where it's like, okay, we want to start getting compensated for our time, right? Because we've all gone so long being underpaid, being paid less than everybody else. But sometimes you just have to put that down, right? Like you can always, those are choices. Everything that you do with your time is a choice. Okay, you'll take time to go have a happy hour with somebody. Take that, invite your mentee. You know what I'm saying?
But that's the thing though. That was the point. He's like, these happy hours are not happening as much as they used to because everyone really
then
is
get a headset and while you're driving, talk. Right?
Now, that's a good solution, but I think, for me, it was an acknowledgement of something. I'm like, that's right. And we arrived at, maybe the practice of law isn't as altruistic as we may want to believe. Because I will say this, that I do think that a lot of people, a lot of potential mentors, and this is probably more prevalent, I would say maybe, you could talk about the in-house perspective, but like, you have folks demanding more, right? More and more of the system. You have older lawyers practicing longer, right? Staying on board longer. The financial pressures on law firms are not decreasing, and there is this general, whether or not you believe in it or you do not, there's a general acceptance of, I'm sick. I shouldn't go to work. It's no longer a thing of honor to say, hey, I've never taken a sick day. So it's impacting not just mentors and mentees and their expectations for what they want of work, but also the mentors and their own expectations of what they want out of work, which is starting to lead to a crunch for time.
Well, and I don't see mentoring somebody as work. For me, it makes my law license more meaningful.
So we should mandate it.
It's no. It's just. You got to find the mentors who have that philosophy. Mentoring doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be in person. There's so many ways. It could even just be knowing you got me on speed dial, right? Right. Just knowing, like I told was Alyssa, your colleague, and she called me right away, and I love that, right? Because as we get older in this profession, you're kind of left with, Emil and I had this really deep conversation earlier today about like, what are we left with when we're on our deathbeds, right? Mm-hmm. Why do these guys stay in these law firms with their names on, insisting that their names stay on these, signs on the walls, when they're like in their 80s, 90s? Like, why? Because everybody wants to be left with some legacy, some impact. It's human nature to want to have an impact. And that's when we talk, it fulfills me. There's actually research that shows that when you give, it's actually more beneficial emotionally. Mm-hmm. It releases endorphins more than even receiving, right? So we just need to think a little bit deeper and find those people that have that philosophy. I have it. I can't talk to everybody, right? I only have like this much bandwidth in my brain to have a number of mentees or whatever, but there are a lot of us, so I think it's just kind of reorienting and changing the way that we see these things as not being work. This is part of the profession. This is part of what gives this profession meaning. And to this exchange.
I think that's more impact. That's more of a legacy than leaving your name on a building. Those interactions, those relationships that you build, what you leave. I've always thought that. Like, I don't think about a legacy. I don't think you can put legacy even in your children, because they can go. You want them to do what they're going to do, right? So I don't even think about it as children or a trust or a fund or or money. I think about it as the relationship impact that I had, the exchanges that we had. That's your true legacy, because you'll look back and say, generations on, I want my mentors, everyone who's known me to know them as these great people.
That's right.
Whether they're here or not. So I think we need to shift. This is a very, this can often be a toxic individual.
The true way to immortalize yourself, to me, is to be a good mentor to somebody. Really. Absolutely. I'll tell you, Rodney Cuby is no longer with us. He passed away of cancer a few years ago. and I still have his voice in my head every day, even when I make decisions about my business, you know. And I don't know that he knew that. I hope he did. But his impact will, and he had an impact then on my kids, because I quote him to my kids.
Right, and I mean, and you brought his name up to me, and now he's on this his name is memorialized on this podcast.
That's
so
right.
Absolutely, we need to shift our thinking sometimes. This can be a very, I was getting ready to say, kind of a toxic, individualistic profession at times, depending on, I guess, where your practice or what it is that you do. And sometimes we need to step outside of ourselves and remember the importance of building up other people and having those authentic relationships with other people.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's so much we could talk about when it comes to this topic, and I think this is a good place to leave things at. And Kristen, I think what you just said is very important, as well as Syovata. The idea, the practice of the law, not being, yes, of course, it's not an altruistic venture. We get that, right? But if you think about how the law works, and even how we even measure, at least what the gold standard for measuring what efficiency or not efficiency or success or progress, whatever it looks like. If you think about it, it's the billable hour, which to me is very crazy. You know, it's the law is one of the only few professions. I'm not saying we shouldn't get paid for our time. It's one profession where you get paid less for doing things more efficiently. You get paid, which actually incites, and so if the metric of value becomes the amount of time you could spend at a certain task, and if we can't build that altruism into the practice of law, as we get more pressed for time, as we multitask, as we get distracted even further, right, there will be less time for mentors to mentor and for mentees to seek out mentorship. And then obviously that goes to a deeper issue of the law and what our value system is within the law, especially, in private practice. And we're not going to solve that issue today. But I think the phrase of this podcast is the truest way to immortalize yourself is to be a mentor.
That's right.
I think that's beautiful.
It is. I love that.
You want to add something?
No, that's it. That's the perfect way to leave this.
That's how we live it.
There we go.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much, Syovata,
thank you both
for coming by and talking
I'm
to
honored.
us.
Thank you.
This was
we
great.
are honored. This is so awesome.
I know. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please leave this isn't YouTube, right? So they can leave a like and subscribe. They can subscribe, right, Joe?
Share our podcast.
Share our podcast to all your mothers, to all your fathers, to all your bosses, to all your colleagues, to all your sons, to all your daughters. Listen to it. Add it to your podcast. You can get it wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm assuming you're listening to it somehow. So you're listening to it where you're supposed to be listening to it. See you guys next month. Out row. Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele, and we'll catch you next time.